It feels like today there's this real awareness that we are sort of floating through modernity, unrooted, ungrounded. And so as a reaction to that, it seems, a lot of people are like, what were people doing 500 years ago? I want to do that thing. So maybe that means I buy some acreage and start a little farm. Or maybe it's I go back to the traditional Latin Mass. Or maybe it's start dressing the way people dress because they look like they respected themselves, and people today dress in pajamas. So are you seeing a sort of pushback against modern therapy as if to say, okay, we can't really trust this because this is relatively new. And if, you just mentioned John of the Cross, I mentioned Francis de Sales, we should just be doing that. These are spiritual issues, and anything else has somehow been infected by modern, secular, or Jewish. Wasn't Freud a Jew? I don't know. Maybe he wasn't. But has been infected by that, and therefore we can't trust it. And so we really should just be going back to the way people did things in the early church.
Well, okay, I'm going to go a little bit philosophical, anthropological, what have you. So even if you just looked at the Middle Ages, but I think it would apply to the early church. It would apply basically until about maybe 16th century, that people had an understanding of their world that was very defined, and an understanding of their place in the world that was very defined, and their sense of identity and where they were in the world, in their family, in their society and culture, and in view of God was all known and defined. And there was a security in that. And since, especially in the 20th century, when you see, the rise of like existentialism, the rise of sort of postmodern kind of philosophies, rise of obviously atheism, you have this sense in which in our modern world and postmodern world, that we no longer know who we are. We no longer know where we fit in society, what we're meant to do, and where we are in the universe in relation to God. We no longer know, that's no longer assumed. And so we are left having to figure that out. And when I say we, I don't mean me personally or you. I mean like as a society in general. And so this is why you get books that came out in whenever Camus wrote The Stranger, I forget, 1920s or something. And you get books like that, or The Metamorphosis. You might prefer a lot more Kafka, right?
Yeah.
Like where basically they don't even know why they're there anymore. They have this crisis of an existential crisis. Like, why do I exist? What's the point of anything? And then you get in response to that existential therapies. And some of them are quite good. Like I really like Viktor Frankl, for example, who was a brilliant Jewish man and survivor of the Holocaust, lost his wife and his parents in the Holocaust, but really understood suffering, right, from his experience, and noticed, like in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is a classic, right? He's seeing all the suffering in these concentration camps, and some people are dying, and he's going, that person could technically have lived physically. And then other people, he's looking at going, I don't know how that guy's alive, because he should be dead physically, but he is still alive. And so he was discovering something deep within the soul that gave it meaning. But when we accessed it, and when we could still find meaning in the very worst of places, like a Nazi concentration camp, we could still find our identity in that, who we are in relation to God, and even in the worst sufferings, we can get through anything. And I think so some of this, what we get at, this whole therapy question is, we don't know who we are anymore. And in some ways, not that most therapists aren't going to answer that for you, but they will at least walk you through, if they're good at all, at making sense of and finding meaning in your life.
Yeah, I forget who it was who said, this is the horror of modern man, because he ends in nothing and comes from nothing. He is nothing.
Yeah.
And so you insert that individual into this time where, all the anxieties and stresses and 24-hour news cycles and social media, and good luck.
We're overwhelmed with messages, like information and what's going on in the world right now, which is kind of overwhelmingly stressful
and
for
how do you
any
understand
person.
the world when you don't understand who you are?
Exactly. So in multiple levels, in multiple ways, we are experiencing anxiety. Yeah, we're destabilized. We don't have a sense of security in the world. We're constantly, every day there's another crisis going on in the world.
Yes.
And we wouldn't, and it's not being filtered in any way. And so we're somehow making sense of it. And I think people don't know. And so if they have a therapist, and sometimes people are seeing a therapist for quite a long time sometimes, and that is a stable point in their lives, even if their marriage is falling apart, even if they lose their job, even if their world is going crazy, my therapist is a secure place for me. For good or bad, in some cases it may be very important. In some cases it could be a problem. But I think that's what's happening.
Go and download Truthfully. It's a platform bringing honest conversations and real answers to life's toughest questions. I'm going to keep circling back to this until I feel satisfied. It might be my fault that I'm not. So do you think then that the early church would have benefited from a slew of Catholic therapists? In other words, like, are we really adding anything? Or are you saying basically that not necessarily because people were stable and knew their identity, lived in close-knit communities, had spiritual guides at the ready?
Right.
And
well, it's hard to know because we really don't have a lot of documentation of what the average person was feeling and thinking back in the year 200 or the year 600 or 1300. We hear more about what the wealthy aristocrats were up to. Yeah. Once in a while, we get something brilliant, like St. Augustine's Confessions, where he literally is letting you into his very soul. This is a guy who maybe could have used a good Catholic therapist earlier on, but he got there. He did get there. Of course he did. And so you see in chapter 7 of the Confessions, for example, you see him like wrestling with, I want to be a Christian. I want to accept all this, but I don't want to leave all this other stuff behind. The life of going to the theater and having sex and having, pleasures all the time. And yet I see the truth in the faith. So if I was, I feel like I'm being really presumptuous here. I don't know if I could have helped St. Augustine, but I mean, he could have used some support. He went through kind of his own turmoil for a really long time. And then he has that experience in chapter 8 where he's under the fig tree and he just surrenders it all and he weeps, right? He just weeps. And he had his friend was nearby and he goes to see him afterward, but he kind of did that on his own. But it might have been nice for him to have had some guidance and support.
I don't. It's been a long time since I read the Confessions, but I mean, he may have, Ambrose being one of them, and others.
Yeah, it would see exactly. Like I would love to know what those conversations would have been like. We only know Ambrose, right, was such an amazing preacher, so he was very convincing. So he's a very good apologist, kind of thing. But what were the heart-to-heart conversations like? That would be fascinating.
Thanks very much for watching that clip. You can click the link below if you want to watch the full interview, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.